So multilaterals are institutions like UNAIDS, UN Women, UNICEF, WHO, the whole UN system, and the World Bank, Bretton Woods institutions, amongst others. And many of them have been founded to really focus on a broader vision of social inclusion and universalism. And we see that articulated centrally in the SDGs, where there's no one left behind. And in my own institution, World Bank Group, we're not only interested in eliminating extreme poverty, but we're also committed to boosting shared prosperity, which has a very strong inclusionary element to it. But just for this narrative that I'm going to give you on the role of multilaterals and how they can be useful, I'm going to use an acronym, because I think we need something to refer to the groups that we're talking about. So I'm going to use something that I think is culturally appropriate in the Asian context. And it's the 4 letters, LOGS, L-O-G-S. And that, for me, the acronym is left out groups. But you find in many Asian languages that LOGS refers to people. And I think it's very important that when we're talking about inclusion, we recognize that the folks that we're interested in including are first and foremost people and citizens that have the same rights and entitlements as everyone else. But despite the multilateral mission for inclusion, sometimes we don't walk the talk. And I think first and foremost, one of our biggest agendas with respect to LOGS is to make a more compelling argument on why it's important for investment. Make that argument much more logical. And here, I think particularly at this time, we have to change the discourse now more than ever, that diversity is a strength and an opportunity for every society and not a threat. And I think we have to be much, much more proactive in getting that message out and making it clear that in every society, we are better off with diversity, which is a full inclusion and embracing of the diversity that society has, rather than feeling that that is some threat that needs to be excluded or walled off. So, my rant on LOGS begins with respect to the multilaterals with a set of ways in which we can take action on LOGS. The first is to log in. We need to have visibility and give groups, disadvantaged groups, much more clear priority. The World Health Organization's Commission on Social Determinants of Health, UNICEF's strategy on equity for children, and the World Bank's publication under Jim Wolfenson, Voices of the Poor. I think these are evidence of the way in which multilateral institutions can really begin to log in and make this part of their central agenda. However, it's not only logging in, we have to catalog. And here we need to create the information systems that give identity to these groups. Because if you have no identity, if you are of no country, be it by virtue of birth, because you were born to migrant workers who were not registered in a country, you don't exist, you're invisible. But not only do we have to give people that right to identity, we need to build linkages across information systems so that we understand their well-being and their welfare. Do they have housing? Do they have access to school? Do they have access to health care? So cataloging and logging in. But that's not sufficient. We need to dialogue. And here I'm picking up on Sarah's point, but I think all the evidence in health systems is pointing to the imperative of making sure that we engage all our clients in a process of co-design and co-implementation in their health care, because it is, in the end, their health care. So if we've got those basics, logging in, cataloging, and dialoguing, we need to take on the really tough part. and this is understanding what the log algorithms are for social inclusion. What works? And here we shouldn't kid ourselves that there's one thing to be committed and engaged. There's another thing to have evidence on what actually delivers meaningful inclusion. Now, the good thing is we're not starting from scratch. There is a very rich and increasingly robust evidence base on the value of targeting. And this is being able to recognize that different groups require different types of interventions in order to make up massive deficits in terms of social outcomes. And in that regard, the World Bank Group's experience with conditional cash transfers and putting money in the hands of poor women or disadvantaged women or widowed women are some of where we've developed an evidence base for really getting much more systematic inclusion. In India, the Avahan project, which targeted most at-risk populations, commercial sex workers specifically, has managed to decrease prevalence of HIV, not only in the most at-risk groups, but nationally by 60% over a 10-year period. So I think we do have an evidence base for targeting, which we need to amplify and build on. But it's not just targeting, because I think as Dr. Brundtland was pointing out, we need system-wide change. And we need system-wide change to take care and eliminate backlogs. And the backlogs are really the dangerous things, because those are the inertial forces that prevent societies from being more responsive to changing and diverse needs. And Sarah, your point on the training of health workers is an excellent one. To this day, most of the health workforce reflect the golden spoon children who have been trained in urban areas and given every opportunity to move into tertiary care. They do not reflect the population that needs to be served. But if you look at the opportunities for those children who are not born into privilege, those minority groups that have no access to schooling, the graduation rates from secondary school, the admission rates to health professional schools of disadvantaged and minority populations, they're not commendable anywhere, and they're not reflecting what we need. So that's a huge backlog that we need to address and address very clearly. My final remark is, if we are addressing the issues of logging in, cataloging, dialoguing, logarithmic log algorithms, and backlogs, then we have to continue to look at the most humbling part of social change, which that is, even with the best design programs, we often have outcomes that don't match our expectations. Tudor Hart wrote perhaps most prophetically about this in the context of the National Health Service in the UK, when he identified his inverse care law, which was, despite the establishment of the National Health Service in the post-war of England in the 1960s, there were clear evidence that the poorest and most needy were still not beneficiaries of the universal system. So the point is that we really need to make sure that we're having the log order change that we'd like to see, to make sure that we're walking the talk with evidence and clear targets for achievement with respect to this agenda.
Fabulous. Thank you, Terry. So that was